Shall we start, sir?
Please go on. Yeah.
A very good afternoon to one and all. I welcome you all for today's CME, cracking a case with analytical chemistry, with the blessings of our founder, chairman, and president, Sri R.L. Jalapa sir. I welcome Sri G.H. Nagaraja, Sri Rajendra J, our vice president of our trust, Sri Hanmant Raju KG, the secretary of our trust, Dr. C.V. Raghuveer sir, pro chancellor, our honorable vice chancellor sir, Dr. Pradeep Kumar G, Dr. D.V.L.N. Prasad, registrar of our academy, Dr. P.N. Sriramulu, principal and dean of our academy and medical college, Dr. Sheila madam, medical superintendent, and Dr. Dinesh, deputy medical superintendent, HOD of forensic medicine, Dr. Srinivas Reddy, for today's webinar. I welcome Dr. V.V. Pillai sir, the main resource person for today's topic titled Cracking a Case with Analytical Chemistry. As we all know that the forensic toxicology deals with qualitative and quantitative analysis of the biological samples for the presence of alcohol, drugs and poisons and their corresponding metabolites. The very purpose of selecting particularly this topic in this month is that the local population we have documented and the statistics of our institution states that the majority number of organophosphorus and organochlorine compound poisoning and snake bites to happen during the March to August. So this was the intention of we selecting, and we have plans of establishment of toxicology lab, poison detection center in our institution, for which we had conducted a series of guest lectures and other things previously. And with the guidance and inputs from Dr. V.V. Pillai sir, we wish to take this poisoning center further. So with this brief introduction, the objective of we selecting the topic, I wish to say a few things about V.V. Pillai sir. Sir is the chief of Poison Control Center and head of the Analytical Toxicology. And sir is the professor and head of Forensic Medicine and Medical Toxicology in Amrita Institute of Medical Sciences, Cochin, Kerala. Sir has lot many publications and various research activities sir has conducted. So theirs is a nationally accredited clinical toxicology lab, and it has been observed that they receive around 75,000 samples annually from all over the country. Sir did his undergraduation and post-graduation from Gandhi Medical College, Hyderabad. And it has been to say about the notable publications and memorable publications. Sir has got more than 100 publications in national and international scientific journals, of which 29 are indexed in PubMed, Scopus, and Web of Science. Sir has authored many textbooks. To name few things, the medical toxicology, now the present 4th edition, he has authored it. And comprehensive medical toxicology, the 3rd edition is authored by sir. Textbook on forensic medicine and toxicology, the 19th edition. He has contributed a section on toxicology for Oxford Textbook of Medicine, APA Textbook of Medicine, Textbook of Emergency and Trauma Care, Tandon's Textbook of Cardiology, and is the editor of Journal of Indian Society of Toxicology. He is a referee on toxicology for Journal of Association of Physicians of India. He has contributed several monographs on analytical toxicology. He is the working group member of the WHO's Guidelines for Poison Control Network. He has founded the Indian Society of Toxicology, and he has been awarded by the Society of Toxicology USA Travel Award. And he has been conferred Lifetime Achievement Award for contribution to medical toxicology in India by Indian Society of Toxicology. He has been awarded Fellow of Indian Academy of Forensic Science, Forensic Medicine by Indian Academy of Forensic Medicine at 43rd Annual National Conference in 2022. So the credentials of Sir clearly states that he is a notable person for our institution to take our poison detection center further. Sir, we request after the CME and other things, we need your guidance and help in taking our forensic medicine toxicology center further, sir. So with this, I request sir to take over, and please go ahead with the webinar, sir. Thank you, sir. I request our Pradeep Kumar sir to say few words.
Pillai, good afternoon, Pillai. There's nothing for me to say except to say it's a privilege and honor to have my former colleague from Gandhi during the good old PG days to be sharing today's session. Pillai, welcome. And after long gap, I'm able to see you virtually online. Dear colleagues, Pillai has taken a path which many dreaded to take the path 30 years back. And his perseverance and persistence in his beliefs made a huge difference and impact to the outcome of management of patient care in emergencies. The so-called golden hour, not only to cardiology, but also reflects onto the management of toxicology cases too. Dr. Pillai, I just wanted to congratulate you. Also ensure that we are compliant across the country in centers which have established several PDCs, but they are, most of them are not round the clock. The observation what I made is not round the clock. Shashi, can we request to mute all?
Yes, sir.
I think Dr. Praveen Kumar, could you please mute yourself?
Mute.
Pillai, can you hear me? Just raise your hand in case you hear me. Because you are muted. Yeah, thank you. Now, just telling many centers have established the PTCs, but they're not functioning round the clock, resulting in poor service, which includes many centers in our own region. The effectiveness of managing patient care will primarily be if these centers provide round-the-clock service, especially in the nights, because most departments shut down by 4:35, and whenever case comes in after 5 o'clock, till next day 10 o'clock or so, the reports are not being provided to the clinicians to decide in the patient care. So my appeal through you to the fraternities, whoever has established center, please make it operational round the clock, and let us take this opportunity to try to save every life. Really, I don't want to speak much about toxicology. I'm very eagerly waiting to listen to you and help the fraternity take further. Thank you. Please go on.
Thank you. I hope I can be heard.
Yes, you're audible.
Yes. First of all, let me thank Professor Shashidhar and Professor Reddy from Forensic Medicine Department, all the other organizing members of this webinar to have called me. I have visited your institute myself several times. I know you're all doing very well, and I'm also happy with the forensic medicine and toxicology department attempting to do something in the area of toxicology.
Can I request
Sir, you can please unmute, sir. Please, sir. You can please unmute.
Pillai, we can't hear you.
Sorry. Yes, yeah. I've unmuted myself.
Yes,
and I was saying that it is a great privilege and honor for me to be part of the webinar. In contrast to what Dr. Pradeep said, and of course, our association, that is my association with Dr. Pradeep goes back a long way, right from our post-graduation days. He's been one of the guides and mentors for me in the specialty right from the time we were students. And it is a matter of great happiness for me that Dr. Pradeep has achieved so much in his career and scaled, the peaks of success. And he is where he is only because of his hard work and dedication and all that he has done for the fraternity. We are all very grateful to him and the other seniors also like him who have done a lot for the specialty. But we expect that going forward, not only the seniors, but the others also step in and improve this wonderful specialty of ours.
Thank
So
you,
Dr. Pradeep, yes, Dr. Pradeep was mentioning some very pertinent points with regard to toxicology. And yes, I know that several centers have been started in institutes across the country and a few are struggling perhaps. And some other centers are doing a little bit, but they can expand and give better, kind of services. I request all the participants to please mute yourselves because background, noise can affect the presentation. All of you mute yourselves.
Dr. Praveen Kumar, kindly, this is the third time you have been unmuting and distracting. May I request this gentleman, Dr. Praveen, I don't know where are you from, please mute. Thank you.
Thank
Go on.
you.
Sorry for the interruption.
Thank you. Thank you. So I was saying that, yes, we need to do a little bit more with regard to the Poison Control Center movement in India, which began so long ago, 1992, if I'm not mistaken, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Delhi first started. And it is now 3 decades down the line. And though progress has been made, it is not perhaps adequate enough. So yes, I agree with Dr. Pradeep that some more stimulus has to be given. We are very happy with the National Medical Commission, however, bringing out this new curriculum, which has given a big boost to toxicology. But the implementation, of course, leaves a little bit of worry because there are a little bit, areas of confusion here and there. We'll come to that later. And yes, I'm all for helping institutes either start, poison control centers or toxicology laboratories or clinical, toxicology setup, or, help the growth of these centers if they are already established. And I have been doing my bit for Sri Devaraj's Medical College also. I have come, as I said, once or twice, and I know that the center should expand and maybe go forward a little bit more. We'll do what we can in the days to come. So I'll begin my presentation now, for which I need to share. And I hope that the usual kind of glitch that I face here at this particular stage will not happen, because when we start sharing a presentation, sometimes things begin to go wrong. So please do let me know whether the slide, you can see the first slide. I'll run the slideshow. This is the first slide. I hope it can be seen by all.
Yes, go on. We can see it.
Yes.
Go on. Yeah.
I bring greetings from the Poison Control Center here in Amrita Institute of Medical Sciences in Cochin. And I may mention that it is part of Amrita Vishwa Vidyapeetham, deemed university or deemed to be university. And we are very proud to be associated with this eminent university, which has taken huge strides in such a short span of time, just about 20 years or so. And I belong, of course, to the School of Medicine Kochi campus. With regard to the university as well as the medical college, both are doing very well indeed. And this is actually the ranking from the previous year. This year, we have bettered these rankings of last year. This is NIRF. And Amrita Vishwa Vidyapeetham itself is ranked among top 5 universities in India. And Amrita, Medical College or School of Medicine is now among 6, or I should say 5 best medical colleges in India. But most importantly, what we feel really proud is the fact that we are accredited by NAC as A++. That is the maximum grade possible for a university or institute. So as you can see, there is a lot that we need to be careful about when we work in an institute like this that is committed to excellence in academics and hospital, management of patients, research, and all these kinds of things. So all of us here, the faculty, the staff, students, we are constantly trying to better ourselves. With regard to the Poison Control Center in AIIMS Cochin, it's a 24-hour poison information service combined with an analytical toxicology laboratory. Both are attached to the Department of Forensic Medicine and Toxicology. With regard to the Poison Control Center as a whole, it is 18 years since we established ourselves, while the Analytical Toxicology Laboratory, which is a part of it, has been accredited by NABL for the last 13 years. Our center is listed in the Global Directory of World Health Organization, and I think that we are, if I may say so, the most full-fledged poison control center right now in India. So I have come here, and I should not waste too much time because a lot needs to be spoken about with regard to the topic on hand, that is analytical toxicology in criminal poisoning, or cracking cases with analytical chemistry, as the organizers have suggested with regard to the title. I'll also touch upon some fascinating case histories from our own center with regard to criminal poisoning. A brief introduction to what we do in Amrita School of Medicine, especially the Department of Forensic Medicine and Toxicology. We are a department that believes in unit-based working. So we have created 4 units, 2 in toxicology. One is the Poison Control Center, which is mainly the Poison Information Center. Then we have Analytical Toxicology Laboratory, Clinical Forensic Medicine Unit, and Forensic Pathology Unit. The Forensic Pathology Unit is the only private setup in the entire state of Kerala, which is undertaking medico-legal autopsies. Poison Control Center, as I've just mentioned, listed in WHO Global Directory for the last 18 years. Clinical Forensic Medicine Unit is a collaborative kind of venture with the Emergency Medicine Department of the Emergency Room. And Analytical Toxicology Laboratory is, as I've already mentioned, NABL accredited. This is a kind of collage of images from our department comprising all these units. And with regard to the Poison Control Center, very briefly, let me tell you as to what we do. Poison Information Unit provides information service on poisons, drugs, poisoning, overdose, adverse effects, etc., round the clock, 24 hours, 7 days a week, free of cost. And this service is provided over phone, email, fax, postal mail, personal contact, etc. And we answer queries with the help of some of the best toxicology software packages that exist in the world, including PoisIndex from the US, ToxBase from the UK, Toxins from New Zealand, and ChemInfo from the World Health Organization. By utilizing all of these, we can provide, believe me, information on more than 1 million toxic agents. All these years that we have been in service, I can't think of a single question that really stumped us. Some of the questions may have been complex and may have required some time to research and answer, but almost all, to my memory, we have answered eventually. With regard to the Poison Control Center, again, we have this collaboration I've already told you with Emergency Medicine Department, and the Poison Information Unit is actually located within the Emergency Medicine Department. The department, that is Emergency Medicine, is fully equipped, staffed to deal with poisoning cases. We have a decontamination room, which is a kind of unique feature that I don't think exists in most hospitals across India. And yet it's so important. We'll come to that. We also have an observation treatment ward for poisoning. Both the departments, that is Emergency Medicine and Forensic Medicine and Toxicology, have MD programs recognized by NMC, and we have regular seminars. For some of these, we involve both departments together. Then we do have, this is to show you the entry to Emergency Medicine Department of our hospital, where we have the Poison Information and Clinical Forensic Medicine Unit. I head the Poison Information Unit, and Dr. Ramakrishnan, who is my colleague, associate professor in our department, he heads the Clinical Forensic Medicine Unit. This is the decontamination room that I talked about in our hospital, which is located within the Emergency Medicine Department or emergency room. And as you can see, we have facility for a whole body wash of poisoned victims, where especially spillage has occurred on the clothes or the body. We also have facility for stomach wash or gastric lavage, which we don't embark upon very often. And we also have facility for whole gut lavage or whole bowel irrigation. There is also an image showing you the crash cart comprising of basically emergency drugs that are required in poisoning cases. Mostly they are antidotes. So you can say that these are trays of common antidotes. With regard to the Analytical Toxicology Laboratory, which is NABL accredited, we are located in the Medical College Tower, 9th floor, right from the inception, that is nearly 20 years ago. And we utilize the following methods listed on this slide for our testing. As you can see, many of them are very simple kinds of methodologies using basic kind of equipment. We have TLC, that is thin layer chromatography, facility for biochemical color tests, spectrophotometry, gas chromatography, high pressure or high performance liquid chromatography, etc. For other more advanced kinds of testing, we have tie-up with other labs here in the area of Cochin. Especially for heavy metals testing, we have tie-up for equipment like atomic absorption spectroscopy and even very advanced kind of instrumentation, that is ICP-AES, or inductively coupled plasma atomic emission spectroscopy. We also have access to LCMS, which is rarely required actually in clinical toxicology, but sometimes it may be called into question. Since this is a clinical toxicology laboratory, we accept samples only or mainly from living victims, comprising mostly body fluids like blood, urine. Sometimes we also analyze stomach contents in the form of vomiters or aspirate. We also analyze other kinds of things like water, food, medicinal samples, etc., for contaminants, adulterants, and poisons. We have accepted, of course, cases from purely forensic, situations also. This is an overview or a collage of images from the Analytical Toxicology Laboratory. As you can see, it is virtually an all-women team led by Dr. Ms. Arati, who is now doing her PhD and will be a doctor very soon. She's an MPhil in toxicology and a very, very capable lady indeed. She manages the Analytical Toxicology Laboratory with the help of some very, very efficient technical staff. I'm mainly a supervisor here, more than a person actively involved, though in the beginning I was involved more directly with the laboratory. These are the statistics of our toxicology laboratory up to 2019. From 2014 to 2019, the pandemic broke and our services were affected a little bit. We are now getting back on our feet. We are like the phrase goes, rising like a phoenix once again from the ashes. As you can see, in 2019, we had sampled 5,316 kinds of samples for analysis. Then there was a bit of a lull, 2020 and 2021 and 2022. So far, from January to June, whether you believe it or not, we have analyzed more than 3,000 samples. So it looks like we may cross 6,000 samples in 2022. So we have virtually got back on our feet very well. And I really hope that this pandemic is for once and for all going out of the globe or the world. Analytical Toxicology Laboratory, we try our best to make the results available within a few minutes to maximum of a few hours, unless it's something like heavy metals, which will naturally take a little longer. And the report can be accessed immediately when it's ready by a doctor, even if the doctor is in a remote area, as long as computer facility is there. And we make sure the printed copy of every report signed by the analysis is supplied separately to the address given. We are always available to interpret every toxicology report issued by us, because one has to understand that toxicology reports sometimes are difficult to interpret, unlike biochemistry reports or pathology reports, etc. And one has to be sometimes careful. Clarifications of queries are always possible by email or phone or personal contact. With regard to the common tests that we do, we have a tox screen, which is a preliminary screening for common poisons drugs. When nothing is known, nobody knows exactly what poison is involved. We have a substance abuse screen that takes into account some of the common substance abuse. We also have, of course, group tests comprising of almost all the pesticides available in India. almost all the heavy metals, toxic alcohols, inhalant gases, several kinds of pharmaceuticals, including sedatives, narcotics, anticholinergics, analgesics, antipyretics, steroids, and many more. And of course, each one of these can also be tested individually. So we have individual poison or drug testing from alcohols, all kinds of chemicals, metallic and non-metallic, pharmaceuticals, and plant toxins. As you can see, it's quite a comprehensive kind of a toxicology menu that we have. We also undertake water samples and food samples, medicine samples, etc., for contaminants and adulterants. So the question arises, do we do all these kinds of tests with sophisticated instrumentation? The answer is emphatic no. We utilize mostly simple tests that are listed here, basically color tests, TLC, and spectrophotometry. Sometimes we go to additional tests like kit-based assays with auto analyzer, and on a few occasions, high performance or high pressure liquid chromatography or HPLC. Very rarely do we go for the other kinds of sophisticated instrumentation. As I said, we have tie-up with labs which have those kinds of instruments. We don't have those in our laboratory because it really is counterproductive. And you may end up becoming a hugely loss-making venture if you have instrumentation which is very, very costly and it is rarely utilized. The advantages of simple kinds of tests: number one, inexpensive; number two, easy to perform; number three, quick; number four, basic laboratory setup would do; number five, easy to interpret; and number six, we can decide when to send a particular sample for advanced confirmatory testing. As you can see, this is what a clinical toxicology setting should have. All these are important, what are listed here. And only for forensic toxicology setting do you need to go for very sophisticated instrumentation, because naturally in a court of law, you have to prove beyond reasonable doubt as to the identity of poison, as to the quantitation, as to what kind of effects, particular concentration of a particular kind of drug or poison will have on a person, and so on and so forth. And that is why forensic toxicology laboratory must not be confused with a clinical toxicology laboratory. The former has to be essentially sophisticated, while the latter needs to be just a basic kind of setup. All right. The question is sometimes asked, is sophisticated chemical analysis preferable over basic setup, especially in cases where you are really dependent upon toxicology analysis for treatment or maybe for forensic purposes? Even here, the answer actually is not always. In fact, there are several pitfalls when you use sophisticated instrumentation. Number one, even though you may use the most sophisticated equipment available, believe me, there are certain poisons or chemicals that may not be possible to detect. It may come as a surprise. In other words, there are some examples of poisons which can virtually be undetectable, whatever the methodology used. And so what's the purpose of, having a sophisticated setup and saying that we can do all kinds of analysis? Not true. Traces of random toxicants may be picked up by sophisticated instruments, and this can actually lead to confusion. And when confusion happens in a case, then that can impact management in a living, victim, and it can impact the administration of justice if it's a forensic case, as has happened in a few cases that we ourselves have handled. If there is time, I'll talk about that later. Then there is the issue of qualified, experienced staff. To operate sophisticated equipment, you have to have that kind of trained staff, and that is not easily available, especially in India, where toxicology is still, struggling to be established, especially in the hospitals. And finally, results are prone to incorrect interpretation sometimes. I've already mentioned that toxicology reporting is not like reporting with regard to, other things that we see in hospital, like biochemistry reports or pathology or microbiology, or even, reports related to biotechnology. These are more or less straightforward. And, you get a report, you read it, and you can form your conclusions immediately. Toxicology reports are not like that. Sometimes what is there in the report will have to be interpreted in light of the patient, the condition of the patient that you have, or the evolution of the symptoms, or the history of exposure, all these kinds of things. And what a report actually means may be quite different from what it appears on casual reading. So these are the reasons why sophisticated instrumentation must, as far as possible, kept to a bare minimum, especially in clinical toxicology cases. Enough of technical issues. We'll take up questions at the end of the lecture. I'm sure there'll be time. But let's take a look at a few cases that we have handled over a period of time, especially related to forensic aspects. And this is from the first half of the period of operation of our Poison Control Center. That is from the inception to about, I think, 2012, I've taken cases. The second half of the period also, we have had very interesting cases. That's from 2013 to the present time. Maybe I'll deal with some of those cases in a subsequent session if the organizers would like to have one more. But there are so many cases that we need to go like this, some cases at a time. And therefore, I thought, let us look at some of the cases that we handled the first half of the period of operations. And from that, I've selected 5 cases. The first one is the Good Samaritan. This happened in 2006, on 20 March 2006 to be precise, when there was a heavy rush at cinemas in Cochin. Remember, 2006 was a time when there were no multiplexes, and mostly it was cinema theaters, of the conventional type that existed till recently. And we did not have, of course, any kind of online streaming platforms and stuff, and even television, channels telecasting movies and all that, not all that much. So there used to be always a great, kind of rush for cinemas, for, films in cinema theaters. And if it involves a superstar like Mohanlal, for instance, in Malayalam cinema, then you can imagine how much of rush there can be on the first day of a new release. And that's what happened on this day, 20 March 2006, heavy rush. And a middle-aged male, we'll just call him SRN, his initials. He was from a nearby area, nearby to Cochin, and he had come to the theater hopeful of watching this film after a tiring, day's work before going back home. And he was very despondent because there was this board showing house full. He was waiting wondering what to do, perhaps to go back, he will have to take a bus. He was pondering on all those things when a stranger approached him and said that he has an extra ticket. His friend, he said, has not turned up, and so he would like to offer this ticket at no extra cost. He was not a black marketer. He made it a point to mention that. SRN was delighted and, of course, grabbed the offer. And both of them went inside to watch the movie. And the friendly stranger became friendlier and friendlier, to the point that when the intermission or the interval came around, he even offered SRN a soft drink, which he accepted gladly. And he was really thinking, what a wonderful kind of friend I've made on this day. But unfortunately, after that, his problems began. After the interval, and after he had finished the soft drink, SRN began to feel uneasy, dizzy, disoriented, and he was really getting to be quite unwell. But we don't have to worry, because a Good Samaritan is still around. And he is very concerned. He offers to escort SRN to a hospital nearby. And of course, SRN has to agree, because he's quite unwell by now and he's not in a position to watch the movie. So the Good Samaritan takes him in an auto, for which, whether you believe it or not, he himself pays. But on arrival at the hospital, SRN is minus his watch, gold ring and wallet, though he himself is not aware at this time. The Good Samaritan then gets him admitted in the casualty and then disappears. Disappears, in fact, forever. He was never traced. And what happens to SRN? He is in bad shape indeed. He is stuporous, and the attending physicians are all puzzled. There are no signs of actual illness or abnormal investigations, and most of his vitals are stable. And they start wondering as to what is wrong with this man. And finally, after quite a long time, it strikes one of them that maybe this could be actually a toxicology case. Maybe some poison or drug may be involved. And so what do? They take some samples, body fluid samples from SRN, blood and urine, and send it to us for analysis, by which time in 2006 we had more or less established ourselves, and almost all the hospitals definitely in Ernakulam knew about our services, and most parts of, in fact, Kerala also were aware of our services. We received the case, and immediately we knew actually what we were dealing with. This is a case of classical stupefaction, what we call stupefaction in toxicology. That is, administering a chemical or a drug or poison to somebody, a victim, in order to incapacitate that person by way of making him disoriented, confused, unable to think clearly or even move about clearly. Maybe he'll become stuporous. This is called stupefaction. And this is done in order to facilitate a crime, like, for instance, robbery or assault or rape and things like that. And we had a list already with us prepared. We called it the stupefaction list, comprising some of the common drugs or chemical agents used for such a purpose, comprising mainly anticholinergics, antihistamines, benzodiazepines, barbiturates, and opioids. So we did the testing and found out within no time that one of these was involved, one of the benzodiazepines, that is flurazepam, which is notorious for causing disorientation, confusion, etc., aside from drowsiness and stupor. We communicated the result to the attending physicians of the case, and they gave one round of the antidote for benzodiazepines, that is flumazenil, and the victim recovered dramatically. He recovered immediately and started singing like a canary, in fact, telling everybody as to what exactly happened, though some of the bits and pieces were missing in what he stated because of what we call retrograde amnesia. That is notorious with regard to agents like flurazepam. But most of it he could recall. However, even though the police tried to investigate and find out who was responsible for his stupefaction and loss of his money and other things, they could never trace that person. So lessons from this case: number one, cases of stupefaction like this are on the rise in India even today. Even though this has been around for a long time, it is almost like a scourge in India, where innocent victims are accosted, like for instance in crowded places like theaters or malls, or maybe during travel, on a train or bus or whatever it is. Somebody, friendly stranger approaches the victim, offers him spliced food or drink, and then the person becomes disoriented, incapacitated, and then he gets robbed. Or if it's a woman, she may be raped, or it may be also for the purpose of any kind of assault. There is an entity called date rape, where a boy sometimes takes out a girl with ulterior motives, and he uses one of the drugs listed in the earlier slide in the girl's food or drink, and then she gets incapacitated, and rape may be accomplished by the boy. And when the girl eventually recovers, she may not have much of an idea as to what happened, because I told you some of these agents cause what is called retrograde amnesia, and very difficult to find out who the culprit was in such cases. Importance of including toxicology causes in differential diagnosis always. We find that many a clinician unfortunately thinks of poisons or toxins virtually at the end when everything else is ruled out. And I think that poisons or drugs do deserve a better kind of position in differential diagnosis than the bottom of the barrel. The importance of getting samples of blood or urine of a victim analyzed by a competent laboratory at the earliest is also of paramount importance, as also the fact that every major hospital actually should have at least a basic toxicology lab set up for cases like this. All right, we will now move on to the second case from our files, and this also happened in 2006. This is also another very fascinating and slightly strange case. I've titled it Bleeding Fingers because it involved a young girl who was brought by her anxious mother for a very peculiar complaint indeed, and that is periodic bleeding from underneath her fingernails for no reason. And naturally, the mother was very worried, and the pediatrician, when he examined this curious case, he could find really no abnormality other than the fact that the child is saying that she bleeds from underneath her fingernails periodically. Even the bleeding and clotting parameters which were checked were normal. So he asked as to what else they could offer, by way of help for diagnosing. And the mother then produced a small sample of blood, which she said the girl had collected in the last bleeding episode. And this blood sample, when the pediatrician looked at it, did not look very much like blood. So he wanted to confirm it, and he sent it to our laboratory to find out whether it really was blood. I don't know whether he chose the right laboratory, but I think he chose us rightly, if I may say so, because we did find out, number one, that it was not really blood. It was just an orange red liquid with no blood cells. And we found out not only that it is not blood, we found out as to what exactly it was, because we asked the mother as to the occupation of her husband, that's a girl's father, and the mother said that he was a small-time candy manufacturer, which began to ring a bell in our mind. And we asked as to whether any kind of coloring agents are used for these candies. And we got, the father also to be, involved in our investigation. And he said that, yes, he has access to several kinds of dyes, of which one dye is Sudan Red 1. It's a red colored dye. Then we asked him to get a sample of this, and we ran it as a standard on HPLC, and we found that it is the same as the so-called blood sample. When the girl was now, confronted with this information that it is actually not blood, you have been just fabricating it, this is nothing but a dye, she finally broke down. And she said that she pretended to all this only because she felt that parental attention was coming down, because there was now a younger brother in the family and he was getting more attention, and she wanted a little bit more attention and sympathy from her parents. That is why she resorted to this. So we did send her for counseling. We also sent the parents for counseling and admonished them for, not paying enough attention to one child and devoting more attention to another. So this was the case of bleeding fingers, and we were pretty happy with the outcome of the whole thing. So what is the lesson that we need to learn from this case? History must not always be relied upon, especially in toxicology, because sometimes in a case where somebody has consumed poison deliberately by way of self-harm, that person is not going to come out with the kind of information that is true, because he does not want to be helped. And in a case like this, for instance, a child who has also got a motive, again, the kind of history that the child may come up with, even though the child himself or herself may be very innocent, may not be, authentic or true at all. So history is something in toxicology cases, especially, that you need to approach with a little bit of caution. Yes, if everything else is ruled out in a baffling clinical case, always think of toxicology. I think almost all so-called perplexing cases, clinical cases, will eventually be solved if you include poisons or drugs in the differential diagnosis. And the third point that needs to be remembered is that if a basic kind of testing is not helpful in toxicology, like TLC, that is thin layer chromatography, then you have to certainly go on to slightly more advanced kind of testing, including HPLC or GC. Fine. We will now go on to case number 3, which is from 2009 actually, and this is a very, very strange case indeed. In fact, we published this case and it received a lot of attention from toxicologists and doctors, not only from India, but even from abroad. And this, as suggested by the title itself, is very curious indeed. Attempted homicide with vitamins. This involved a sample of water that we got actually from Karnataka, from Mangalore to be specific, through a colleague of mine who sent this sample across and said that this is a water sample used by his friend who was a businessman, and that businessman was a little paranoid because he had a lot of enemies, business enemies, who were out to get him, or so that is what he thought. So he was always very careful. Now this man had the habit of keeping a glass of water by his bedside at night when he retires to bed, because sometimes he would wake up in the middle of the night thirsty, and so he always felt that a glass of water nearby would be nice during the night. Now, unfortunately, his bed itself was located close to the window of the room, and the window was always kept open for fresh air. So naturally, the glass of water also would be near the window and accessible to somebody from outside. This was the ground floor. So what happened on the fateful morning was that when he woke up, he looked at the glass of water and he found it to be a little discolored. And when he smelt, he could detect a faint kind of odor, though he could not place it as to what kind of odor it is. He was very alarmed, and he was sure that this is an attempt at poisoning. Somebody in the night may have reached from the window and put some poison in his glass of water, hoping that in the night he would drink and maybe die. So he was very much in a flap, and fortunately for him, this colleague of mine who was a friend of his suggested, why don't you send that for analysis to our laboratory? So we received the sample, and we decided to start with the usual, kinds of chemicals and drugs. And because it's a medical legal case, we were really very careful. Even though the person had not informed the police so far, it's potentially, going to be done if we detect some poison. So we approached with caution, began with all kinds of, common chemicals and biological toxins, which revealed nothing. And then we wondered what to do. We got back to the person concerned and said, we can extend the testing to more exotic poisons, but this is going to be a bit expensive. And this man said, no question. Expense is no issue at all here. It's a question of my life. So I've got money, do whatever possible and just find out what poison is involved. So we said, all right. And we went forth to do a very comprehensive, kind of screen, right down to common pharmaceuticals and even unusual kinds of things, right down to vitamins. And you won't believe it. The sample tested positive for vitamin B complex, virtually all the vitamin B in the B complex. And we were really very, very surprised. And we got back with the results saying that, what is this? You send the water sample across as something containing poison, and actually contains something that's good for health. It contains vitamins. And the man then was very sheepish, and he said that probably this is what happened. On that fateful night, he must have got up, maybe thirsty, he couldn't recollect, and he must have seen this tablet B complex that he had failed to take the night before when he retired to bed, and he popped it into his mouth. And because he was very sleepy and groggy, while gulping, the tablet down with water, maybe the tablet did not go down the right way, and instead of going down his throat, it went back into the glass of water. And then that got dissolved, because after all, B complex vitamins are water soluble. And by morning, it had discolored the water a little bit. And when he saw that water, he jumped to the conclusion that maybe somebody added poison. So as you can see, an extremely strange, almost bizarre, but quite amusing kind of incident that ended well. And from poison that was meant to kill him, we proved that it was actually something that would sustain his health, and that is vitamins. As I said earlier, we published this as a case report, and that received a lot of I think feedback from toxicologists and physicians. All right, we move on to another interesting case, another quite strange case, and this time it involves not a human being but a bird by name macaw. I'm sure many of you know what a macaw is. It's a very brightly colored exotic parrot, and it is not like the usual parrot. It's much bigger bird with a long tail, and it makes a lot of squawking, kinds of sounds, and sometimes it can almost imitate human voices also. It's supposed to be a kind of status symbol to have a macaw. Macaw is not natural to India, so it has to be imported. It's a pretty costly bird, mostly from South America. I believe at the time when we got this, when we were handling this case, that is in 2010, the cost of each bird, a macaw would be around 1 to 1.5 lakh rupees. I'm not very sure as to what is the cost today. So this kind of case concerns a macaw that was being grown as a pet by somebody who was working basically in the Gulf. So much of the time he was not in Kerala, and the bird was looked after by a caretaker in his ancestral house. Unfortunately, one morning he found the bird dead in the cage, and he was really very, very anxious and worried, because I told you it's a very costly bird. And he got back to the owner immediately and relayed the sad news. And the owner got really furious, not only because the bird had died, but because it had been in good health the previous evening and had even had some nuts for dinner and looked pretty all right. And so how could the bird die? The man was convinced that this is deliberate killing of the bird by somebody, maybe some business enemies. Again, this kind of thing I think is quite common in commercial businesses where you have a lot of enemies. So he also had some enemies, he said, who were threatening harm to him. And perhaps he said because he's in the Gulf, they could not get to him. So they harmed his bird instead. That's what he was convinced. So he suspected foul play. He said that the bird must have been poisoned. And you won't believe it, he got the case registered in a police station in Kerala as an unnatural death of a bird. You won't believe this, but this is exactly what happened. I really don't remember what section was applied, if at all Indian Penal Code was applied, or was it some other act to do with wildlife or something like that. I really don't recall. But the Kerala police are quite efficient, and whatever offense or whatever kind of allegation you make, be sure that they will enter that as a case and make it in the form of a report. So I think my battery, unnatural death of a bird, that is macaw, and the police not only registered the case as foul play, but also, whether believe it or not, ordered an autopsy to be done by a veterinary surgeon. I told you, Kerala police is pretty efficient. And the veterinary forensic expert did a meticulous kind of autopsy. We could, get to know that later on when we read the autopsy report. And he came to the conclusion that it could be poisoning because he could not find any signs of disease or injury at autopsy. And he also had the presence of mind to collect samples of the bird's viscera, what is called entrails. And these he sent to our lab through the police. So we received the viscera or the entrails of the bird, and we read about the case, and we were really, quite, I should say, taken aback at this kind of sample, which we had not received earlier. But then we set about looking at common toxins in the viscera of the bird. And after a bit of testing, we came to the culprit, and that was nothing but an organophosphorus insecticide, chlorpyrifos, pretty common in Kerala. And that was present in the viscera. We conveyed this information to the police, and we said that it is most probably not accidental contamination of the nuts that were given to the bird the previous night, but most probably deliberate addition of pesticide or insecticide to the nuts for some reason. But the police, even though they listened to us and all that, they were getting a bit tired of this case involving the bird, and they closed it, saying that they can't believe that somebody would do such a thing. And most probably, if you have discovered some insecticide in the nuts that were given to the bird, it must have been accidental contamination, and then they closed the case. We even asked for the nuts, that were given, whether some more nuts are there for us to examine, but the police did not submit because probably by this time they were thinking that we were nuts. So that is about the case of the macaw. Unfortunately, we couldn't get the kind of conclusion that we wanted. Even now, when I look back, I feel that this was actually a case of foul play. I don't think it was accidental contamination of the nuts, given to the bird by this insecticide. I think it was deliberate addition, because after all, when you talk of nuts like peanuts, if it is accidental contamination during spraying of the crop, you will expect the insecticide to be present on the outer shell. But the shell, is removed and the peanuts are given to birds. So there is no question of contamination accidentally happening here. Anyway, that is about that particular case. And we will move on to the next one. And no, before that, let us look at the lessons from this case. Yes, there's only one lesson. Toxicology is not restricted to humans alone. I may mention that subsequently, we also received some samples from an elephant that died under suspicious circumstances in a zoo in Karnataka, I think Mysore Zoo. And that was, there was suspicion that the elephant was killed for the tusk, for the ivory, poaching. And that was also a pretty interesting case that we received much later. It comes in the second half of our period of operation. So maybe I'll take it up in the next session, if at all there is going to be one. Now we will look at the last case for this session, and that is a copper caper. That was reported finally in 2011 by us, but the case itself, a very tragic case indeed, began in 2004. To be precise, November 13, 2004, when a young girl, 18 years old, died in a nearby medical college hospital in Kottayam. And she had just given birth to a baby girl 3 months ago. According to her parents, a lady acquaintance had taken their daughter through her aunt to a resort at Kumaragam, which is a wonderful, kind of place in Kerala, full of resorts and all that. Very beautiful place, a lot of backwaters. And here, in a resort, this girl was taken by this lady. We will call her Ellen. And that the purpose was to introduce this girl to a TV serial producer who promised to, give her a role in one of his serials. That was the reason why the girl was taken there. But unfortunately, that was not really the reason. It was for sexual abuse. And this so-called serial producer, TV serial producer abused her, but she was also abused by several others. And in fact, she was initiated later on to sex racket, which was being operated by this lady that we refer to as Miss Ellen. And eventually this girl got pregnant and she was urged to undergo an abortion, but she refused. She said that she would like to have the child. And she went ahead and delivered the child. But very tragically, some unexpected, post-delivery complications set in, and she died 3 months later. That was the case. By this time, the media had got wind of this, and you know how the media can be, especially in Kerala. And they went into a frenzy over this case. There was a huge hue and cry over the mysterious death, and all kinds of allegations were being cast about that this is a clear-cut case of murder, and that was done only to silence her, because some of those who abused her were individuals belonging to very high stations in life, maybe politicians, doctors, lawyers, all kinds of people who were patronizing that sex racket, and they didn't want their names to come out. So the media said that this is a case that needs to be investigated properly. And finally, the political establishment was compelled to transfer the case to the CBI. In this case, an autopsy actually was done, and Visra had been sent for toxicological analysis. The real problem happened when the toxicology report was received from the chemical examiner's laboratory in Trivandrum, the premier laboratory in the forensic sector in Kerala. And that came as positive in this particular case for high levels of copper, which was totally, unexpected. Nobody was expecting, this kind of result at all. And yet the report stated that the blood sample had 5.25 milligram per 100 ml of copper, when average normal levels are just about 0.2 to 0.4 milligram per 100 ml, even for pregnant or lactating women, and it's much less for the others. So it did look as if there is some sort of, issue of poisoning here. And the media really went into a frenzy. And various newspapers and TV channels virtually declared that this young poisoned, and the agent must be some sort of copper salt. So the lady involved, that is Miss Ellen, was then arrested. And this is an image of that lady at the time of arrest. And nobody was really thinking that so far there had been no evidence right up to this point of copper poisoning at all. In this case, nobody was suspecting, either clinically or at the time of autopsy, or with regard to anybody else involved with the case. Nobody was suspecting copper. And yet it turned up positive. Except in the chemical analysis report, there was nothing else to suggest actually copper poisoning. So the police were very puzzled. They didn't know how to go forward, and they decided to have a second opinion. So they came to us, not only with regard to the reanalysis of remaining blood sample of copper level, but also a reanalysis of the autopsy report. We looked at the autopsy report, and they were quite consistent. The findings were quite consistent with post-operative complications leading to septicemia, which was in fact given as a cause of death in the hospital report. So that was fine. Then we looked at the issue of sampling, and we felt that because it's such a sensitive case, it had to be done really well. And we decided to collaborate with the Central Forensic Science Laboratory in Hyderabad, where this instrument ICP-AES was at that time available, whereas in Cochin, not even the kind of setup that we have a tie-up with right now had this instrument. That is inductively coupled atomic emission spectroscopy. This particular sample, in fact, I myself took it with me and interacted with the director of CFSL, who was a very cooperative person. And with the help of this laboratory, the sample was analyzed. I was there at the time when the analysis was being done. Of course, I didn't know how to operate the instrument. It was all done by a highly trained staff. And the result came out as this. You can see the result is virtually normal, a very far cry indeed from the report that was presented by the chemical examiner's laboratory in Trivandrum. So the police were now really very confused as to how can there be so much of discrepancy between two reports. Our report, in fact, was done, was finalized only after the sample was analyzed twice. We had to make sure. Even though it was a very expensive procedure, we went for it twice, and we were pretty sure about our results. And that is what we told the police. So the police investigated the reasons for the discrepancy and found out these points. Number one, The first analysis was done by a non-accredited lab. That's sorry to say. Even today, I don't think the chemical examiners lab in Trivandrum is accredited. I think it should be, just as most other forensic science laboratories should be accredited. It's very important because that is some kind of monitoring of what goes on in labs like this, which perform very sensitive tests for administration of justice. We were by that time NABL accredited, and of course our Poison Control Center itself was accredited by the WHO. The method that was used in the first analysis, atomic absorption spectroscopy, nothing wrong with it. It's pretty good method. But today, actually, if it is a sensitive case, if it's an important case, you have to go to really high-end, kind of instrumentation for metal analysis like ICP AES or ICP MS, that is mass spectrometry. Most shockingly were these points, the last mentioned bulleted item. Instrument used in the first analysis was not calibrated. Can you believe this? And even a periodic kind of instrument upkeep and all that was not satisfactory. And the most shocking point was that actually the testing was not done in the chemical examiner's lab at all, but by an adjacent food testing laboratory. That also came under the government setup, but it, most of the time we're testing food samples only. So the protocol that was used here in the sample that was sent was a protocol that is normally used for food samples. So naturally you'll get erroneous results, and that is what I think happened here. So final opinion on this case, no evidence of copper poisoning accepted by the court, which finally led to the public outcry and trial by media dying down. And in 2012 on 8th February, the court that was trying the case finally gave the verdict, and that is sentencing the accused, 5 of them, to 10 years in prison for criminal conspiracy, while the main accused turned approver and was acquitted, and the case was closed. So you can see sometimes when a casual kind of approach is taken in toxicology, you can end up with a lot of problems. So the importance of correctly performing toxicological analysis, cannot be overstated. It is also very important from this particular case that instruments should be calibrated properly and regularly, and specific protocols for human samples should only be used for analysis. And I also emphasize once again the importance of accrediting Indian forensic science and chemical examiners laboratories by NABL or WHO. It's also important to seek second opinion wherever necessary, especially if we get unexpected toxicological findings in a particular case. So that is all with regard to me, with regard to my presentation for today. And if the participants or the audience here would like to know more about such forensic toxic cases, may I suggest most humbly one of my textbooks that is basically meant for undergraduate students, textbook of forensic medicine and toxicology, but there are a lot of case histories. And some of the cases, of course, don't really belong to us. There are other cases from other parts of the country and the world, but it gives you a good, kind of picture as to how fascinating, toxicology can be and how useful toxicological analysis can be in cases like this. If you don't want to read a book, then you can perhaps consider joining the Poison Club on Facebook. We have a group there. We also have a dedicated setup on YouTube. The Indian Society of Toxicology has a channel on toxicology. And yes, I would like to take this opportunity of welcoming you all to the next conference of the Indian Society of Toxicology, that is the 16th annual conference, what is referred as Toxicon. This is Toxicon 16, and it will be held in Kasturba Medical College, Mangalore in Karnataka, the institute where I worked for 10 years before I joined, Amrita Institute of Medical Sciences, Cochin. And I have very fond memories indeed of KMC Mangalore. Please do come, and we will, have many more discussions on toxicology. So that is all from me. I wind up because I think we have come to the end of the scheduled time also. Thank you all very much for a patient listening. Thank you, especially the organizers. And thank you, Dr. Pradeep, for facilitating this.
Thank you, Pillai. Yeah. It was very enlightening refreshing for me being away from the undergraduate teaching schedule and no PGs around. So it was a revision for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think somebody raised the hand, or ask the organizers to please take over.
Yes, thank you, sir. And thank you, Dr. V. Pillai, sir, for the very insightful and very interesting cases which were deliberated. I request the audience, if they have any questions or queries, to please you can post it in the chat box, or you can raise the hand or unmute and please go ahead.
I think in the chat box, there's nothing. Pillai, as I think, let me set the ball rolling. Very often, most of the people keep questioning whether the reports of CFL are only accepted in courts and private lab. This is a very common misnomer most of us have. I would like to clarify that.
Yes, it is good that you raised it, because this is a constant, kind of thing that I have to face from especially my own colleagues, who say that how can your reports be accepted in a court of law? You're not even a toxicologist and all those kinds of things. And then I say that I'm an authorized signatory for toxicology reports by the NABN. What more do you want? So I don't think it is a court that should decide as to who should be a signatory for a toxicology report. And where is it written that if a particular report is furnished on any aspect in a particular case that can help in administration of justice, and if the court is satisfied that that particular methodology meets with scientific credentials and authenticity, where is it written that the court will not accept it? These are all imaginary kinds of fears. And I've been in this toxicology field, analytical toxicology, the last nearly 20 years. And I've never ever faced any kind of situation from the court, any kind of court. In fact, just recently, a few days ago, I was in Trivandrum for a case that we did. And that was a drunkenness case. And casually the judge, I think the lawyer asked me as to what my laboratory is all about and why the samples were not sent to the chemical examiner's laboratory. Why did we do it and things like that? And I explained, this is a living victim, and chemical examiner's laboratories and forensic science laboratories don't accept samples from living victims as far as possible. So we step in such cases. And we do the analysis, and we are following a standard operating protocol. We are accredited by NABL, we are accredited by WHO. What more do you want? So I think the very fact that we have been in existence for 20 years, and some of our reports have been, in fact, accepted by court over and above the government lab report, like in the case that I mentioned, the last one, the copper poisoning case. The court accepted our report as authentic and said that the chemical examiner's report from Trivandrum, should not be taken into consideration. So all this should give you hope that there's nothing like that.
Very often, the biochemistry lab, which reports gives values of X, Y, or Y, are accepted by the courts. I'm sure that should also be no option. Harish, can you please take the questions in the chat box?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, there is a question in the chat box by Mrs. Shreya Subramaniam. Sir, would a bedside test for OP poisoning be useful in a practical setup, even just a qualitative test?
Okay. Can you please suggest us what kind of test is being referred to? What kind of bedside test?
Madam, you can please, sir, the test she is requesting is for the OP poisoning.
Because I'm not aware of any bedside test for OP poisoning. That's why I'm asking you. Maybe if there is something useful that we missed, we'll incorporate it in our toxicology menu. I don't think there is a bedside test for organophosphorus compounds. There is, TLC for various kinds of organophosphorus insecticides, but how do you know as to which organophosphate insecticide is involved? And even if you want to do it in the form of a TLC, TLC is not really a bedside, kind of facility, isn't it? When you say bedside, it has to be something where you use a kit or you use, something like, for instance, the color test. That's fine. But I can't think of a color test or a kit-based test for any organophosphorus compound. So bedside testing is not applicable here, I think.
Thank you, sir. Sir, Dr. Praveen Kumar has a question. Dr. Praveen Kumar, please go ahead.
Sir, am I audible, sir?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, you're audible.
Sir, in case of recently, I underwent a case where there was a multiple pharmaceutical agent consumption. Now, how will you proceed through that test, sir? Treating doctor doesn't know what was the agent there.
Yes,
multiple pharmaceutical agent consumption.
I understand. That kind of case can be quite challenging, and we will have to start from scratch. Try to find out what would possibly be involved, and then test for those specifically in the laboratory and go forward by a process of exclusion. And you may eventually end up with satisfactory results, or you may not. So it is a case where you have to understand that you may not eventually get what you want. There are cases like that.
Okay, sir. Sir, there is one more question in the chat box by Dr. Aditya. It says, sir, if the chemical lab in Trivandrum is still not accredited, then how are the reports still being accepted as evidence in the court of law?
We are not putting down any laboratory here. Believe me, 90% of the laboratories in the forensic sector are not accredited. So why single out the laboratory in Trivandrum? There are other kinds of accreditations perhaps they're doing, like what we call internal quality control. Many laboratories do that. I'm sure the lab in Trivandrum must be at least doing that internal quality, assurance, and maybe inter-laboratory comparisons and all that. We are not really aware. What I'm suggesting is that why not make it uniform, standardized across the country, that all laboratories, especially performing sensitive, kinds of testing, forensic cases most especially, why don't you go for a common kinds of accreditation? And that the best kind of accreditation that I can think of is NABL, because that is promoted by the government of India. So it's not to put down the chemical examiner's laboratory. We should not be doing that. I'm sure they're doing good work, and sometimes laboratories do make errors. We have also made some errors, and that's how it is. So let's move forward progressively and without condemning anybody towards a kind of testing in poisoning cases, especially forensic cases, whether it's a dead body or a living person.
Right, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir,
Please
Shreya,
verify.
madam. Yes, madam. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Shreya Subramaniam, third minor MBBS from Mimar Medical College. Sir, actually, the OP poisoning question that I had, I'm currently working on developing a bedside test for OP poisoning, sir. So,
Okay.
I'm trying to develop a coloring reaction using ammonium molybdate and concentrated nitric acid. So that is why I wanted, even before undertaking the project, just in the spirit of actually being a useful project, I wanted to ask if, in case I come up with a test, would it be actually relevant in a clinical setup?
Before I answer that question, I'm a little curious as to the test that you are developing, the bedside test. Will it be positive for all organophosphorus insecticides? There are about 30 to 40 or more different organophosphorus insecticides. So is it a kind of test that will be positive for all or only for selected agents?
Sir, I'm aiming for finding it for all organophosphorus.
So what is the underlying, mechanism that you are, using to find out this kind of because it baffles me a little bit. There are so many kinds of chemicals, and how can you have a common test that will be positive for all? I'm a little curious.
Yes, sir. Sir, actually, I read some research papers, and as I was going through them, I found out that whenever samples are taken after after a person has ingested OP, there are two types of samples present in the serum and the urine. One is either the parent pesticide as it is, or the metabolites of the OP poison. And sir, majority of the metabolites of all types of OP poison are in the form of DAP, dialkyl phosphates. It
Okay.
can either be a diethyl phosphate or a dimethyl phosphate. So I am sticking to just the phosphate part of the metabolite, sir. And I researched some part of it from inorganic chemistry also. And there was one reaction, phosphate from any organic compound plus concentrated nitric acid and ammonium molybdate. It gives a definitive bright yellow coloring, sir. So I'm working on developing that more and more, both in test tube and on a filter paper, sir.
I think I have read about this some time ago, but there are a lot of problems, with regard to this testing, if I may say so. Number one, when you are looking at phosphate moiety, you have to understand there are so many chemicals which are not really organophosphates, which can also test positive, isn't it? How we are going to exclude that? Number one. And number two, there are several kinds of organophosphates, insecticides or pesticides that don't really break down in this manner. They don't really break down in the way you described. So how are you going to include those in your testing? It's just, out of curiosity, I'm asking. I think this kind of testing was attempted in the past and it lost favor because of these problems. That's to my knowledge.
Yes, sir. Sir, actually, this test is, it will give the same reaction for arsenic poisoning also. I had read about it. So I will plan on including a dye also in the next step that is specific for phosphate, sir. So that is my plan of action for now, sir. But this is still under extreme research, sir. I have not come up with a definitive method yet.
Okay, I'm very happy that you're pursuing this kind of approach, because we do need a bedside test for organophosphorus insecticides, as also for several other kinds of chemicals and pesticides. I hope you will meet with success, and I wish you all the very best. When you come up with something concrete, some good result, please let me know. I'm very, very interested in being kept informed.
So thank you so much, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, Dr. Rajesh has raised the hand. Dr. Rajesh, sir, please go ahead. You can ask the question.
Sir, good evening. This is Dr. Rajesh, Department of Emergency Medicine Associate Professor. Way back 8 years back, I met you in PS Medical College in a guest lecture. Wondering you still continue your academics. And after that, we did have a lot of case discussions and toxicology. Me and Jidu used to regularly call you for, and we did send some samples to Amrita from Kupam also.
Okay.
Nice to hear talk, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, same here. Same here. Thank you.
Pillai, incidentally, Rajesh is with us in Kolar as emergency medicine physician.
Okay.
And we are in the process of establishing the PG department. Recently had an inspection, and looking forward for Rajesh to play long innings as a captain of the team.
I wish Dr. Rajesh all the very best, and I'm sure he will be able to accomplish that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for highlighting us on the importance of the Poison Control Center and your resolute efforts in contributing towards the societal commitment, and also the importance of the enable accreditation for the toxicology lab. Thank you for highlighting on this. Now I request Dr. Rajkumar, Assistant Professor, Department of Forensic Medicine and Toxicology of our college, to propose the vote of thanks.
Yeah, Harish, small interjection here.
Sir, yes,
so
sir.
all my colleagues, I just wanted to share the thought which Pillai has started or initiated. There should be a good link between the Department of Biochemistry and Forensic Medicine, which will ensure a proper functioning of the lab, as is happening in Manipal and other centers. So coming together of biochemistry and forensic is an important element. And the support from emergency medicine is very vital in ensuring that we provide the best of the care to the patient. So I think we should make a very strong connectivity of biochemistry with forensic to go a long way, is my small suggestion.
Indeed, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the suggestion. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Over to Dr. Rajkumar, sir. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, one and all. I take this opportunity to propose vote of thanks on behalf of Department of Biochemistry and Department of Forensic Medicine and Toxicology. First and foremost, we pay homage to our late founders, President Sri R.L. Jalapaji. At the outset, we would like to thank our patrons of Sri Devaraj Education Trust, Honorable President and Chancellor Sri G.S. Nagaraja sir, Honorable Vice President Sri G. J. Rajendra sir, Honorable Secretary Hanmant Raju KG sir, Honorable Chancellor and of Sri Devaraj Academy of Higher Education and Research, Scholar Sri G.S. Nagaraja sir, Honorable Pro Chancellor Dr. C.V. Raghuveer, Honorable Vice Chancellor Dr. Pradeep Kumar Ji sir, Registrar Dr. D.V.L.N. Prasad, Dean of Faculty of Medicine and Principal Dr. Sriramlu P.L., Medical Superintendent Dr. Sheila S. sir, Vice Principal Dr. Shashidhar K.N. sir, and Deputy Medical Superintendent Dr. Dinesh sir. We also extend my thanks to our other officers of the Academy. We thank our beloved Principal Dr. Sriramlu P.L., SDMC, for his unceasing support and encouragement. We thank Dr. Shashidhar K.N., Vice Principal, Sri Devaraj Medical College, and Professor and Head of the Department of Biochemistry, whose motivation has been pivotal in this conduct of national webinar. We are indebted for his undaunting support, and it is tacit to acknowledge Sir's focal role in conducting various events of the Academy. We thank today's speaker, distinguished luminary Dr. Vijay V. Pillai, the Chief of Poison Control Center and Clinical Forensic Unit, Professor and Head of Forensic Medicine and Toxicology, Amrita School of Medicine, Cochin, for accepting our invitation as speaker and delivering insightful and excellent presentation. Thank you very much, sir. We are looking forward to your long-term goodwill and association with Sri Devaraja's Academy of Higher Education and Research. We thank the faculty of Department of Biochemistry and Forensic Medicine and Toxicology for their support. We thank all the participants for the event for making it a grand success. Last but not the least, I thank the non-teaching, the photographer and technical team members who are part of this program. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you very much, all
Thank
of you. Thank you, Pradeep.
Good to see you a long time. We hope to see in person. Probably I request my colleagues from Forensic to invite you, take an opportunity to do a offline session so that we can have some small get together soon.
Sure, that will be a privilege.
Yeah.
And please do come to KMC Mangalore, Pradeep, for the toxicology conference.
Yeah, I'll
be
be there.
forward to that. Dr. Pratik Rastogi will be organizing that.
I'm aware of that. Actually, next week I have to be visiting Manipal for a court duty after 15 years. I'm getting a summons. I told them, please let somebody go, but they said, no, you have to come. So I'm going to attend the court. Thank you, Pillai. Thank you for.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you, team Forensic and Biochemistry. Yeah.